to the Blue Shoes Fitness Podcast, where we talk about strength training, nutrition, faith, family, and how all of those things work together for parents like you and me. My name is Coach Jay, and today I've got a Q&A episode for you. These are questions that you've sent in and from around the internet that I am super excited to answer for you and to give you some helpful input. I host a Q&A episode every 5 episodes on the podcast, so all of the episode numbers that are multiples of 5. So be on the lookout for episode 40 if you have any questions that you want to send in next time. All right, let's kick things off with our verse of the week before we get into the Q&A. This is going to be out of Ephesians chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. As a church right now, we're going through the book of Ephesians, and this was a verse that I came across a couple weeks ago. It says, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people, and his incomparably great power for us who believe. So this is Paul praying, the Apostle Paul praying over the church in Ephesus. And I love this prayer because I think that it presents three aspects of our faith that we can pray about all the time, no matter what our season of life looks like or what we're going through, good, bad, ugly. We can always pray over these three things, over ourselves, over our kids, over our friends, neighbors, family, you name it. We can always be praying over these three things. First of all, it's that we might know three different things. The first is the hope to which we've been called. And that hope is the salvation that comes through Jesus, through what he did on the cross and the resurrection that followed. So the hope is the first thing that we ought to pray that we might know more deeply. The second thing is the riches of his glorious inheritance. So this inheritance that we've been called to is the kingdom of heaven and heaven itself, and being with Jesus for all of eternity. The inheritance and you'll see this idea of inheritance in heaven, inheritance as far as treasures in heaven. You'll see this all throughout the Gospels and all throughout Paul's letters. And this is something that I view, it's current, but I view it as a future inheritance that we will be able to grasp for those who believe. And the last side of this, the third thing that we might know more deeply, is his incomparably great power. So we have hope, inheritance, and power. It says his incomparably great power for us who believe. This is the power of the Holy Spirit that lives within us and works through us, and is the same power that raised Jesus from the grave. And so these are things that I am increasingly excited to pray over for myself, but for our kids as well, that they might know these three things: this hope that we've been called to, the glorious inheritance that we have, and this power that is within us. I hope that encourages you as you go throughout this week too. And I would definitely encourage you to pray this over yourself, the people that you know and love, and to see what God does through that. All right. We have our Q&A, and we're starting off with question number 1 with somebody prefacing that this might be a dumb question. That says, maybe a dumb question, but can good mornings be used instead of an RDL, which is a Romanian deadlift? Just looking for an alternative, and I've been doing RDLs for a while. Kind of bored, lol. So this is a great question. This is not a dumb question, but I do have a very simple answer for you. And I don't know who initially said this, and I don't even know if it was one person, if it's as specific enough to be quoted back to one person. But I read somewhere a while back that good mornings are just a worse version of an RDL, and I could not agree more. If you're unfamiliar with these two movements, an RDL, let's start with that one. A Romanian deadlift is your typical deadlift variation that you'll see most people using to build up their glutes, first of all, and then their hamstrings secondarily. So this is where you're holding the bar in your hands, you're standing straight up, and then you're pushing your hips straight backward, kind of bending at mostly at the hips, a little bit at your knees. You're lowering that bar past your knees, maybe to mid shins or so, and then coming up from there to stand up, squeezing your glutes and hamstrings along the way. So this is a Romanian deadlift. A good morning is, for all intents and purposes, a similar movement pattern where you're still hinging at your hips. You're primarily moving at your hips, a little bit of movement in your knees. But the key difference is that instead of holding the bar down low in your hands, you're actually holding the bar up on your upper or middle traps on your back. So instead of having that bar down low, comfortably in your hands where you have a good grip, and it adds to your stability because that load is lower to the ground. Now you've moved the load, I don't know, for most people, maybe 3 feet upward from where it would be if it were down in your hands, and you are balancing that on your upper back. And so this is, you can maybe even just picture how this could be problematic. Certainly, you're not going to be able to lift as much weight on a good morning as you would with a Romanian deadlift. And that is usually not a good thing when it comes to strength and hypertrophy training. However, I will make the caveat that there is a sense where maybe this would make sense to do if you only have certain equipment available to you. For example, if you have a barbell and you have some weight plates, but you don't have enough total weight to be able to make Romanian deadlifts challenging, I still think I would probably swap it out for a unilateral or single leg version of a hinge of some kind, a single leg Romanian deadlift or a B stance Romanian deadlift or something like that. I think that would still be my go to over a good morning. But you could do a good morning. That would still accomplish some of the same purposes, the same. If you could reach the same intensity, you'd get similar adaptations with that. Maybe if you only have resistance bands, like the big loop resistance bands, maybe that would be another reason why you might do a good morning where you have it looped around the back of your neck and down to the underneath your feet, as opposed to trying to do a Romanian deadlift where it might be difficult to shorten the band enough to get enough tension on it. So maybe that would make sense. Um, I'll finish this question with saying that you can absolutely, and this is not me giving you permission. You just have this permission. You can certainly make exercise swaps that are based off of enjoyment and not just what's quote optimal. This question finishes up by saying that I'm kind of bored and I'm just looking for an alternative. You can totally make this swap based off of how you're feeling regarding boredom in your workouts. You don't always have to go, what is just going to be most optimal from a biomechanics standpoint, point of view, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff is great. But sometimes those discussions about what's optimal and optimizing your workouts, sometimes those discussions go a little too far in the pretending that you're a case study that has no emotions, no feelings, all that kind of stuff. And you just want to do the most efficient workout programming ever. You don't care what it takes, sort of thing. That's sort of what we did in school, in college, where we would our assignments in our classes were literally we'd be handed a case study and say, okay, write up a workout program for this person, and that was awesome. But real people are much more complicated than that, and case studies don't get bored of things, but real people do. And so you can absolutely make that swap if that's something that you want to do. Um, but just know that as on the whole, that good mornings are just a worse version of RDLs. All right, next up, tips for dealing with the mental aspects of accepting I'm going to be hungry on a cut. So, yes, this is something that is very common, that if you are in a deficit, if you are in a cutting phase of your diet, you will be in a deficit, and there's a good chance that you will experience some hunger while you're in that. So, we need to talk about this with a little bit of nuance and a little bit of tact, because we can go off into disordered eating territory pretty quickly if we don't approach this well. So, what I'm not saying is that hunger is a good thing, and you should pursue hunger as a way of uh, as a metric of gauging how effective your cut is. That's not the goal here. However, we do need to recognize that some level of hunger in a cut is actually going to be pretty normal, and you can imagine why, because you're operating on fewer calories than your body needs in order to maintain status quo. So that's definitely a normal response. It's not something that's abnormal, that your body's working on. Uh, Potentially, and this is again, you need to hear what I'm meaning here and not just what I'm saying. Potentially, hunger is one sign among many that you might actually be in a deficit. And what I mean by that is you can imagine from the opposite side of it. If you are in a deficit, as far as you know, and you are never, ever, ever, ever hungry to any degree, like you are even just maybe overly full on a lot of occasions, and you're going, yeah, this is super easy. And simultaneously, you're not seeing any progress in the metrics that you're looking at as far as something like weight loss goes or fat loss goes, you might not actually be in the deficit that you think that you are. And so it's worth considering that hunger is, again, and I say one sign among many very intentionally, because by itself it doesn't really tell you a whole lot. There are a lot of reasons why you might feel hunger even if it's not related to being in a cut or a deficit. But one sign among many that you might actually be in a deficit if you are experiencing occasional and not like just consuming hunger. Another thing that's worth recognizing is that hunger does not equal panic mode. And what I mean by this is maybe you've even experienced this yourself. I certainly have, where you are going throughout your day. Maybe you're driving, maybe you're at home, maybe you're whatever it is that you're doing. And all of a sudden you recognize that you're a bit hungry. And even if it's pretty mild hunger, there's a chance that you might just have this panic mode activated. Whereas if you hit this big red button and all of a sudden the sirens are going off, and in your brain you're thinking, I need to get food right now because you just feel like you're gonna die if if you don't. And not even that you feel like you're going to die or waste away from that hunger sensation, but you just in your brain just is like, I can't focus on anything else. I just need to get food. And this is where people who are trying to lose weight in particular can get into a little bit of trouble if they don't have a plan for that situation. It's one thing for me just to say, oh, just recognize that hunger doesn't necessarily mean that you have to panic and that you can just take your time and make an informed decision. But it's another to actually be in that moment and to have that sort of plan fleshed out. So this is where a lot of people will tend to hit that panic button, and then they just drive to, maybe they're on the road already, maybe they're at work on a lunch break, and they just drive to the nearest fast food joint, or they go over to the vending machine at work, or they go to their fridge or pantry at home and they just start stuffing their face just to get any sort of nutrition to be able to reduce that hunger. And that is probably not a great way to go about doing this. It's probably worth fleshing out the details of, hey, recognizing that if you are going to be hungry, as this person is saying in their question, that you might want to have a plan for when that happens so that it doesn't catch you off guard. And if you know that it's going to happen, then it shouldn't be so much of a surprise. And if it's not a surprise, then you can plan for when that happens. What do you do next? Does that make sense? That's something that can be really helpful for them. Another thing is it's worth distinguishing hunger from other factors. A big factor is boredom, and maybe you can relate with this. You eat when you're bored. A lot of people do. And on that, if you want to call boredom an emotion, just any emotion, we have some kind of a tie for a lot of us. We have some kind of a tie to food habits with emotions. And think of like opposite end of the spectrums. You have sad and just depression on one end, and people might say, oh, when I'm depressed or if I'm just feeling sad in a moment, I eat maybe certain foods, or maybe I just eat because I'm feeling sad. On the opposite end of that spectrum, in some ways, you have happiness and joy and celebration even. And how often do we associate those with foods, right? When you're celebrating something, maybe you go out to eat, whether it's a holiday, whether it's an achievement, whatever it is, we associate that with that as well. And so across this emotional spectrum, we tend to associate, oh, I'm feeling this way, I'm going to eat in some fashion. And that's a very normal, common thing as well too. But we do need to recognize that those factors are not going to be driven really primarily by hunger. Those are by some of these other emotional factors that are at play. Another factor that is not related to hunger specifically, but that is tied into this conversation, are just our general food habits as a whole. We have a lot of habits around when we eat, what we eat, how much we eat, et cetera, that aren't related to how hungry we are in any given situation. So for me, I tend to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the exact same times from one day to the next. I also tend to eat the same foods from one day to the next, or at least similar foods, especially with dinner. But those are not specifically related to hunger. I do have those in place in part to help manage my hunger, but just because it's 7 a.m., that doesn't mean that I have to eat at that point. And so that's something where if there's a day where I'm not feeling particularly hungry right at 7 a.m., there's nothing that says that I need to eat doing that. Likewise, if I'm feeling super hungry at 6 a.m., that doesn't mean that I need to wait till 7 a.m. to be able to have breakfast. And the same thing goes for you and your food habits, where your food habits and your food environment can really dictate a lot of how you eat, what you eat, etc., that's not specifically related to hunger. And so it's worth recognizing that all of these things are at play, and that hunger itself is not the only driving decision for how you go about your food. And lastly, this is maybe a little bit practical and a little bit tangential to some of the things that we've talked about already. But if you're not already doing this, managing your protein and fiber intake is going to be a very good place to start to reduce hunger as much as possible, especially in a cut or a calorie deficit. What I mean by this is let's contrast extremes because this kind of helps demonstrate a point. If you have a diet that is 2,000 calories worth of candy, let's just say Snickers, that's the first thing that comes off to mind. You have 2,000 calories worth of Snickers. That's one diet. And on the opposite end of that, you have 2,000 calories worth of something like, let's just say, chicken and broccoli. Super boring, but it's going to demonstrate a point. The candy side of things, 2,000 calories worth, is not going to fill you up in the same way that the chicken and broccoli will fill you up. Even though they're the same total amount of calories, the caloric density in a meal is not the only factor that influences how full you feel after eating that meal. And these are two extremes, but they demonstrate the candy side of things is you might hear that called like empty calories, but those are just going to be more or less nutrient deficient, nutrient poor foods of something like Snickers. Whereas chicken and broccoli, you're going to be getting lots of protein and lots of fiber. And the protein is going to help fill you up. The fiber is literally going to help fill you up. Protein tends to fill you up by way of protein is this big complex mess that your body needs to unwind and untangle, and that takes time and to be able to digest that, and that's going to be a good thing for the sake of satiety. And on the fiber side of things, something like broccoli, if you had even 1,000 calories worth of broccoli, if you split that 2,000 up, that is a ton. If you just look up what 1,000 calories worth of broccoli looks like, that is going to be pounds of broccoli. That will literally fill your stomach up beyond the brim, and you will feel very full, at least temporarily, if you were to try to eat that much, even over the course of a day. And so, managing your protein intake and your fiber intake, you don't have to go to that extreme, of course. Neither end of that spectrum is going to be helpful, but somewhere in the middle is some combination of protein, carbs, and fats that's going to work well for you and your diet at this point in your cutting, for example, here, your deficit that you're in, and that's going to be a great place to be able to manage and reduce your hunger as much as you can, as much as is within your control. Next up, how effective is Barre3 versus Zumba versus HIIT classes? Okay, so anytime this is my warning that I always share. Anytime that you're asking a question of how effective is X, Y, or Z, we always need to add a caveat on the end. I don't know if caveat's really the right word. We need to add a clarification at the end of effective for what. So the way that you can improve your question is to say how effective is X, Y, or Z for ABC reasons or ABC adaptations that you're looking for. So this question, I'm not just going to say, well, it depends because even though it does, I'll try to help you out a little bit here. But how effective is Barre3 versus Zumba versus HIIT classes? We have to ask effective for what? And let me just share the thing that I think that really joins these three specific examples, but then just group training classes in general. I think that one of the main reasons that people do these, and in my opinion, one of the most effective reasons to do these, one of the most effective outcomes of these classes, is for the sake of enjoyment. If you find that these are enjoyable ways for you to move your body and to be in community with people who are going to be doing the same thing, if it's a difference between you being sedentary and you doing these classes a few times a week because you enjoy it, that is totally fair game, and I think that's super underrated. I think that that is a great reason to be able to do something like this. And if you're in this question is sort of comparing these three maybe to each other, if that's the case, you can absolutely do whichever one you prefer. This from an enjoyment point of view. Do whatever you like based off preference. However, if you're asking about these types of classes, and I'm just going to lump them all together because I think they all have the same sort of downfalls. If you're asking effective for something like building strength and muscle mass, you might potentially get some initial gains from doing these types of classes, but you are probably going to see a quick drop off from the adaptations, the positive adaptations that you're going to get in the way of building strength, in the way of building muscle mass. I tend to pick on classes like Barre3 and Pilates and yoga. Not because I don't think that they should exist or anything like that, but I tend to pick on them because a lot of those are associated, even when they're marketed as being a way of building strength or even building muscle mass. Um, you're going to see more often than not people using a much lower intensity in their workouts from a localized muscular point of view, not like just breathing hard or anything like that, but from a muscular intensity point of view, going to be using much lower intensities than are going to be what's required to build any meaningful amount of strength or muscle mass beyond that. You picture a class that is, topping off at 2 pound weights, maybe 2 pounds in each hand. That might build up some strength and muscle mass if you were going from completely sedentary to using this as your form of movement and exercise. That might give you some potential gains right from the beginning, but you're going to see a drop off pretty quickly because those weights are going to get pretty easy pretty quickly if they aren't already. And then what do you do from there? You just need to keep going up in weights. That's maybe one way to be able to do that. But all this is to say that most group classes like these are going to combine different aspects of fitness. So strength, you have muscular endurance, you have cardiovascular endurance, you have mobility training, you have the hypertrophy training side of it too. Most of these classes are going to combine many different aspects of fitness, and they're not going to excel in any one of them. So this is sort of the jack of all trades but a master of none phrasing, where this is a good application of that, where these classes are going to be they're going to maybe teach you some principles about all of these different things, but they're probably not going to really propel you forward positively in any one of them. And so, if you are looking for building strength, you should probably pick something that is going to be more strength focused, like strength training, for example. If you are looking for something like cardiovascular endurance, maybe a HIIT class would be a good option for that. But a lot of HIIT classes are also going to focus on lifting weights and doing things like biceps curls and overhead presses and things like that. And those are not going to meaningfully contribute to your cardiovascular endurance. And so it's probably worth just doing something that's in the way of whatever adaptation it is that you're looking at doing, either by way of separating them into separate workouts or into separate training phases of your training block that you're doing, or even just different portions of your workout itself. You do strength training first, and then you go right into a cardio endurance side of things, and you're good to go. So that would be my overall take on this here. Number 4. All right, here's a good one. Ready for this? What are your thoughts on all the weight loss drugs slash injections like Ozempic? Is this even a safe, healthy, or sustainable way to lose weight? Every so often, I get jealous that it seems so much easier than the quote old fashioned way, but I know there has to be a catch. So, yes, this is the very first question that actually came in for this Q&A, and I posted it on my story because this is something that is hot off the press. This is what everybody's talking about right now, specifically Ozempic. And here's the gist of this drug specifically. This is the brand name for a drug called semaglutide, and and this is a drug that is used to treat two things. They're not totally independent and separate from one another, but they're also not the same thing. The first is type 2 diabetes, and the second is obesity. This is typically a once per week injection, and everybody seems to be talking about it in part because it seems to be showing that it really is effective for these two outcomes of helping with type 2 diabetes and obesity. And here's what the drug itself, semaglutide, is actually helpful for. And just to give you a brief overview, and then we'll get into the bigger picture here. So this drug helps to regulate insulin. It also increases your satiety by kind of two factors here: by slowing gastric emptying and by signaling feelings of fullness. So especially with these last 2 points on this here, in relation to treating obesity and for people using this to lose weight, any drug that is going to increase your feelings of fullness, which is satiety, which is what we've been talking about, whether that is a neural connection, whether it's something that is either physically or chemically working with your digestive system, something like this, where it's going to be slowing gastric emptying, even something where it's think about where people will get surgeries to be able to physically reduce the size of their stomach in order to increase feelings of fullness. The reason why there are different methods to get to this, but increasing feelings of fullness will mean that people will eat less on the whole because they just don't feel like they need to eat more because they are feeling full. And if you're eating less over time, if you're eating in a deficit by way of a drug, by way of a surgery, whatever that looks like, you will incur fat loss. And this is something that is very, very appealing for a lot of people because it absolutely could be very helpful for people, and in fact very life changing for people with type 2 diabetes, for people who are struggling with obesity for a variety of factors. This could absolutely be effective and life changing for those people. However, for your average gym goer, and I would maybe assume from the person asking this question here too, just with my typical audience, that the average gym goer is probably not going to be the primary target audience for a drug like this. And that's for a couple of reasons. But the very first thing that comes to mind is that taking a drug for weight loss or getting a surgery for weight loss, or you can fill in the blank of this here, is not going to address the primary issue that most people experience when it comes to losing weight, losing body fat, and that's going to be their food habits. If you are taking a drug, whether it's an injection, whether it's a pill, whatever that looks like, and that is helping you and causing you to lose weight, you still have all of those same food habits that caused you to gain the weight in the first place. And so you might be altering something chemically or psychologically or even just physically, something like the size of your stomach, you might be altering those, but you're still not addressing the primary cause that got you into that situation. And that's going to be all of your habits surrounding food, surrounding nutrition, all of your beliefs around nutrition, all of those kinds of things. And so that is my biggest gripe around. This is as the question called it, a catch. This would be what I would say is the catch, is that from a sustainability point of view, this is going to be an issue where unless you are taking this drug all the time, forever and ever, you won't actually be changing any of your food habits around this. And so, so that's going to be a big piece of the puzzle that you would need to contend with if you are considering taking this. The second thing is another big factor that a lot of people don't really think about, but it's that taking a weight loss drug like this does not address nutrition education. So this is the same sort of thing where it's not even just in the realm of weight loss drugs. Just think about any sort of diet, whether it's a crash diet or even if it's something that might be, actually kind of helpful. If you're just following the program, even if it's to a T, for the sake of following the program and not actually understanding how it's working in the way of weight loss, you might be at risk for when, let's say, something like Whole 30, you're using that to lose weight and you get to your 30th day and maybe you feel great, maybe you don't, but there's a good chance that you've lost weight along the way because of the types of foods that it restricts. Regardless of the actual diet itself, what do you do on day 31? You're at a choice where you're at a fork in the road where you either need to continue that track of just doing Whole 30 and it's just whole the rest of your life, or you go right back to the way that you were eating before. And again, that's part of the food habits side of thing because that's what you know and that's what you've always done. But it's also nutrition education where if you don't understand how that diet helped you to lose weight, then you're not going to know what middle ground there is between that diet versus how you've been eating this whole time. You're not going to know which factors to change to meet somewhere in the middle to go, okay, I'm going to change these factors because this is going to help me sustain that weight loss. And I'm going to keep these things because this is what's either not important, not relevant, not a big deal, whatever it is. And so the education side of it is a big deal. And as a coach, this is something that I strive to teach my clients so that when they finish up their coaching program with me, that they know they have all the tools. I've given them the tools. I've given them the tools to learn how to fish, not just handing them a fish. And sometimes you have to hand people fish, right? But that helps best when you teach them how to fish along with that. And the last thing on this that I alluded to, but taking a drug like this is going to create a dependency on that drug because there's really no plan B for what if you stop taking that drug, and that's not where a lot of people think when they start taking a weight loss drug. They don't really think what they're going to do afterward. Sometimes they fool themselves into thinking, "Oh, I'm just going to take this until I lose X amount of weight, and then I'll just stop it and I'll be good to go." But in reality, a lot of those people will gain that weight back. Um, Dependency on drugs like this, weight loss drugs or anything that's going to be related to your health, is not inherently a bad thing. But it does add to your bottom line of just everything going on in your life, your overall priorities, your expenses. And if you want a real sticker shock, check out how expensive Ozempic is. Without insurance, it's like a salary for some people. So that's a big part of it. Just your overall basic needs. This is now going to be something that you've added to the category of basic needs in your life, and adding to that bottom line is something that I personally try to actively avoid. I want to keep things as simple as possible, and so these are all just things to contend with as you are figuring out if something like this is either right for you. But the idea of this being a catch, There is a catch in that there are more factors at play than just the weight loss itself. You have to think about what your exit strategy is, or if there's not an exit strategy, what the costs of that are going to look like. All right. Well, that's going to be it for today's Q&A. We only made it through a handful of questions, but maybe we'll save the next ones for the 40th episode here. So I'll leave you with that. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Blue Shoes Fitness Podcast. I'm Coach Jay. Thanks for hanging with me, and we'll see you next time.